Selamat siang, good afternoon, everyone. Some of you maybe good evening. My name is Kok. It's my pleasure to moderate this session. I think the primary focus should be on Ibu Felia and what she wants to say to us, to update us. At the same time, I would also like to have as much time as possible for an interactive session where people can ask questions. Just a few introductory comments. First, Ibu CV has already been distributed. It's very clear, and please acknowledge that she's here in the personal capacity of offering her independent opinion, while she represents the banks in the official capacity. The session today is really to elicit her personal and independent opinion, which we very much prefer. Second point is that in the time that we have, the way we're going to run this is Ibu is going to present for the next 20 minutes or so on the update, and then we will have some questions that have already been sent to the secretary for us to ask her, and we would also then like to have a chance for the audience who are participating to ask questions. Just 2 points about the whole topic, as Tan Sri Munir has said. The COVID situation needs no introduction. I think our focus is on what we call the recovery. You know, where do we go from here? There's no point reciting too much about what's going on if we don't know where we're going. And the second thing is a very participatory process. We need people like yourselves who are interested to be in a forum like this to give ideas and questions. And maybe after Ibu Felia says something, it might trigger questions on your part as to what Indonesia is doing that may be relevant to the countries in ASEAN that you come from. So without much more ado, it's my pleasure to now introduce Ibu Felia to take over and present her talk. Ibu, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to have been invited, very honored to be speaking in this very distinguished outfit. I'll try to, can you show the slides, please? Yeah. Next. Okay, yeah. Well, you see, I'm not going to spend much time. I think people are already quite familiar with the COVID problem. The only difference is that I think Indonesia is a little bit behind than our neighbors. I think Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand are doing, a little bit better than where we are today. But I like to stress that, we are not yet recovering. We're still in the midst of the height of COVID-19, and the situation is still fluid, so please bear in mind. And we have been discussing a lot about the fiscal policies that that all the countries in the world are adopting. They're all quite similar, and which I find quite conventional. But these are the playbook that everybody has. But there's one thing that we have to think about, that this is unprecedented, and that we've never had to face a complete stop to demand and supply, and also that we have to look after livelihoods and life. And we say that economy can recover, but when you're dead, you're dead. So this has been a moral journey in the beginning of the process. So I'd like to cite a few policy responses by the government and how the market has reacted and participated. I've never seen so much cooperation happening across the board, and all the various financial institutions, but as well as industry leaders. Yeah. So and I will show a little bit of the emergency quick response, of course, and there are calibrations after calibrations, as you see, because the situation is fluid. And I would say that we are still on a crisis management mode. And of course, because the topic is this, we are also looking and doing a lot of stress testing. A lot of the banks are doing stress testing and looking at, the various variable to have a reopening plan. So let me start my session. So that's basically the content of my discussion. And I cannot not talk about ASEAN and its strategic role in the face of COVID-19. Next. So as you see, this is the June 15 number. Today we are 8th of July. There's it's very asymmetrical impact of COVID because, you know, you have to see it's an archipelago, different regions has different impacts of the COVID, but these are the latest updates we have. You look at on the right-hand side, the PCR test implemented. They're still quite small in numbers compared to our neighbors, but this is already finally getting traction as we observed of late. And because the PCR tests are already now imported and in place and distributed to the various labs across the nation. So logistically, you know, getting the labs prepared took also quite a few months of a lot of you know, commitment to fulfill. Next. So as I said, you know, the health is high priority, and Indonesia, as we all know, if only then in March that we took it seriously. We have the Gugus Tugas, the task force, directly under the president, you know, to coordinate, troubleshoot, and fast-track execution, you know, implement laboratories, working together with, forging relationship with international suppliers, governments. You know, it was really, we were on emergency mode all the while. Data is an issue in Indonesia, and it still is, but through increasing number of testing and tracing, although it's not high number, but it does show patterns that can be observed and analyzed. And, you know, and by proxy, we can already make some projections. And of course, the more granular, the better the policy that we can propose. Obviously, the most densely populated areas is affected is Java, South Sumatra, and South Sulawesi. Yeah, but of late we see two important areas, Jakarta and West Java, showing some positive developments, almost reaching its peak, and while East Java is still struggling, right? As we observe, like many others, industry leaders have come forward, have worked together with governments and various other parties to repurpose their factories. And because, as you know, in the beginning of the months, it was difficult for Indonesia to obtain masks, you know, medical garments, gloves, etc. So there's quite a few industry leaders who have been able to oblige and supply. And so we are on the right track. Next. This is just a snapshot of the distribution of the asymmetrical impact of COVID throughout the country. You know, we have 34 provinces and 431 municipalities to coordinate with. And, you know, the lockdown measures that has been adopted is by decree of the national government, but a lot of authority is being given to the local governments to manage their own, you know, lockdowns. Next. So, you know, in the first quarter, everybody's still doing well. That's why it took a while to sink in. Consumption growth was still at almost at 3%. But in second quarter, this was all of a sudden a stopgap, right? Things, the realization that the problem is bigger than we had anticipated. So the first policy response that the Ministry of Finance quickly repostured the national budget, as well as giving directives to local governments to follow suit. And as well, and this has never happened before, that governments and parliament are able to work around the clock to get approval for the budget deficit to go beyond the statutory 3% budget deficit limit, to make room primarily for the fiscal support and for obviously for health workers and health related needs, social safety net, and the micro SME. Those were the first quick responses that we observed. Of course, the Indonesian Financial Services Authority introduced immediately the relaxation policy for lending until March 31st of 2021. So the situation is fluid. It is closely watched, but these are what has come out in the early days. Next. So obviously Q2 is the most painful for both supply and demand. However, our large corporate groups, the conglomerates, are well diversified and are still utilizing cash reserve to keep the company afloat, pay workers, and even pay the THR Ramadan for 1 month. For now, I want to stress that it's for now. So, and between March to June, most of the banks have started to restructure, providing 3 or 6 or 12 months term of loan restructuring to corporate, commercial, and SMEs with varying schemes. And obviously, retail transactions have abruptly stopped. Savings instead have gone up. People have stopped buying basically and kept their saving. Some activities have moved online. The use of internet banking has gone up significantly, and of course, e-commerce transaction. But in terms of total value, it's not as large, although it's increasing exponentially. So, working from home, banks closing branches, some up to 30–40% of the branches are affecting a lot of the thinking behind it, whether or not this is something sustainable, because there are some merit to it in terms of efficiency, but that is yet, the jury is still out there. The asymmetrical impact of COVID, of course, sectors who provide essential goods are doing well. Technology companies, digital companies are doing extremely well. We have a few of the unicorns in Indonesia and they're doing extremely well. But sectors like hospitality, tourism, restaurants, malls, these are hardest hit. Next. Now, as we know, Indonesia is a domestic consumption-led growth, but demand and supply have practically come to a halt, right? Jakarta alone, the revenue from hospitality, restaurants, that dropped about 60%, and that goes the same across the board. And another point that we need to note is that Indonesia's aspiring middle class, there's a study by the World Bank, which the number is about 115 million, is dwindling and once again become vulnerable. Most of them are not economically resilient. A good percentage of that is the informal sector. So bear in mind, these are the challenges that Indonesia faces. So the first major emergency social safety net is slowly trickling down. The transmission processes is being prepared, and it's not as what Singapore, they transfer directly to your account, because as you know, issues of data, no single ID, we're still struggling with all the basic data issues. But that said, I want to point out one thing that you need to know. The important deadlines to be observed is October 2020. It's because the restructuring, some of the restructuring, they give in 3 months, 6 months to 12 months. But the bulk of it is giving around 6 months. They are due in October 2020. So we have to see, this is the moment of truth, whether there is some light at the end of the tunnel for the business processes. So, and another date to be observed is the March 2021, when OJK, the Financial Services Authority, lifts the relaxation policy. So the jury is still out there. This is what we need to observe about Indonesia. If we have efficiency in the transmission of the social safety net, immediately this can tweak the consumption growth. This is yet not happening. We have to see how effective not only the supply side, the corporate sector are doing with the relaxation, but also the consumption side. If the social safety nets is being transmitted, if all the various cash transfer programs is being transmitted effectively in the next 2 quarters. Next. So so this is just a snapshot of what I've presented. Right? So these are just some numbers for you to observe. The pre-COVID we were doing quite well, but there are scenarios where if the severe scenario or the very severe scenario, and there are several institutions who've run this number. These are just from numbers that back in June was given by the Ministry of Finance. It was presented by the Minister of Finance. But as I said, things are very fluid, so numbers can still move. So next. So these are the situation. It really needs extraordinary measure, but I would like to show that because it is the share of GDP of consumption is quite significant. So the fiscal stimulus, we hope this to work effectively. Let's hope that happens. And if you see in the first quarter of 2020, things were still looking very, very well for also for the supply side. Next. We'll skip this. Inflation remained low because demand is low, and also because the government has maintained a steady supply of basic and fulfillment of basic commodities. So I must say that the inflation management has been quite prudent and quite consistent. Next. It helped that one thing that goes to our favor is that it helped that Indonesia was in a reasonable economic shape, despite the fact that there's a major global dislocation, in the global growth, right? We entered this pandemic in good shape, relatively good shape. We have been averaging, we've had 4 or 5% growth, and also inflation. We've seen 2.7 lowest in the past 20 years recently. And reserves is still around 6 to 7 months of imports to support the now somewhat slumping rupiah. Right? But look at it, back in 2019, our budget deficit was at 1.76, but with the stimulus that it stands at 6.34%. The government has calculated that more fiscal stimulus is going to be available, although this is still by far the smallest in the region. I think you all are above 10–12% of the GDP. This is the condition that we face. Whilst the overall financial sector is not deep, the banking sector finances much of the economy. And with CAR, and this is a wrong number, the CAR is still above 20%, and 80% is the Eximbank number. So in the banking sector still has a high level of capital adequacy ratio, right? So all efforts, extraordinary measures is being put out to avoid the domino effect. So we really need to manage the supply and demand of the real sector, and also the consumption, so that it doesn't go into becoming a financial crisis, right? So the fiscal management under Sri Mulyani, she's been prudent and responsive. I must say, they have been working at the from home the past 3–4 months on video conferencing, but have been able to come up with very quick and responsive policies. Yeah. So in addition to all the fiscal stimulus, of course, in addition, the government ensures liquidity, allocates budget for as well guarantee schemes to further support the small medium enterprise after the relaxation, providing and encouraging for them to get working capital against the guarantee scheme that is also supported by the fiscal measure. So to prepare for a protected recovery, and because we have different scenarios, standby credit from bilateral and multilateral have been locked in. In addition, Bank Indonesia, which is an unconventional way of working, cooperating, but with the approval of the parliament, it's become the lender of last resort, a temporary measure, right? And Bank Indonesia has been having a good track record of being independent, of being able to manage the interest rates and manage the inflation, and I think they have gained credibility. So we don't want to see what happened, I don't know, 40 years ago, but I don't think we are in that space. Governance has much improved with our central banks. Next. So these are just some numbers to show that the protecting health and saving lives is important, maintaining purchasing power, particularly for the poor, and preventing bankruptcy. So these are the health measures, the social safety net. Next. And of course, supporting the businesses. What's also to be observed is that Indonesia, the government has reduced import restrictions, including manufacturing support of food and health medical goods, acceleration of export-import processes, improvement of course, the national logistics, tax incentives, and I don't need to go through it, but it's dealing with the supply and demand, to support supply and demand, as well as the real sector, and ensuring liquidity, and also siap payung sebelum hujan, additional backup liquidity for just in case there's a protracted workout. Next. Okay, this is the supply and demand, how it's allocated. Next. And of course, the additional policies, these are just some details. There's also the new burden sharing with the central bank. Next. And these are just some of the growth projection from the various other institutions. Next. Now, these are this is the preparation for the reopening. Yeah, and this took a long, hard look and a lot of stress testing and looking at different scenarios, given the lack of data, but as I said, that there's already a pattern from where we have been able to analyze, but the more granular, obviously, the better. So we look at it, two separate scenarios, if we look at economy first or health first. So we look at the base case. I think that's more India, Indonesia, China, and economy first, all the other, the flags of the country, as you see. Obviously, it appears that we have opting for the middle way, right? Next. So this is what's likely to look. It's not like a sharp V shape, but the scenarios for our businesses, this is what it's going to look like. Scenario 2 and possibly scenario 3. Yeah, that's the recovery. Okay, this is some quick sector analysis. We've gone through with the help of our consultants. We've looked at what are the sectors that is resilient. Profit is obviously the green one, and the least, the most affected, of course, is the red one, tourism, and how it affects the workforce. Next. Okay, and in the longer run, we expect these industries to emerge from the crisis looking very different. There is actually a shift, a significant shift in how businesses are being run. There's going to be, obviously, we cannot avoid it, but increased intensity in automation, e-commerce is here to stay, and on and on and on. And of course, what the most change perhaps will be observing the aviation and tourism. And so a lot of attention or the design now is also being given for upskill, retraining of human capital. Next. So this is just very quickly. We're also looking at the mega trends. We just, evolving consumption, the new governance model, innovation and acceleration, obviously, resource constraints. I think we need to look again about climate change. I hope that climate change is not out of everybody's radar with COVID. It should be even more center stage. And of course, what's happening in the economic globalization and demographic asymmetries. Some countries are aging, in some countries, like some countries are young population. Next. I only have a few more slides, I think. So these are the opportunities, the consumer goods, obviously, opportunity, including ICT. Yeah. And of course, the third one is medical and pharmaceutical. And you can see these are quite detailed analysis, assessment. So, yes. And this is opportunities not only for Indonesia, but this is quite relevant to ASEAN as well. You know, we all face the trade war. It appears national self-dependency is very much on top of everybody's mind. But I think as ASEAN community, I think we should beg to differ. Healthcare, automotive manufacturing, digital innovation, sustainability, I cannot say it enough. And tourism, for sure, it will come back, but in some form or other. Next. So these are the ASEAN discussion. Note the emerging markets are vulnerable, not because of COVID-19, but more so due to global imbalance. You know, the US-China trade war. And also the absence of global leadership. Only the scientists seem to talk to each other. So how can we as a collective, now this is, relating to Tan Sri's opening remark, how can we as a collective ensure this region obtains the vaccine? This is first and foremost. Discussions, accessibility and affordability. Similar to WTO ruling on HIV regarding licensing, that this is considered a pandemic, a global crisis, that the vaccine should be for public good. And I think perhaps ASEAN, we should, as ASEAN community, we need to take a look at that and how we can work together in this healthcare sector. Next. Okay, this is, so the short term, the fiscal stimulus, the medium term, how to restore the economy and find new starting point only after tests and vaccine and herd immunity. When that will be, it really depends on how deep is the crisis and how fast is the recovery and how disciplined we are and adapting to the new protocols, the health protocols, right? Health, education, agriculture for food security and food safety have become priority sectors. And you remind us again and again, I'd like to mention climate change and other pressing issues, water, plastic, probably food system change for food security and food safety, for the quality of life, including immunity. There has been a lot of discussion on this, both in the scientific community, but also in the business community. Long-term, more policy reform, structural reforms, adapt to digital economy, and in Indonesia, more than anywhere, addressing the digital divide. Well, there's no global leader. Perhaps ASEAN can start to think about it, and with the healthcare focus, jointly minimize the global imbalance, restart discussion on perhaps, this is just an idea that I'm throwing here, regional stabilization fund, the Chiang Mai initiative, right? And then work on standard health protocol for health and aviation for mobility to help each other. I know that some of the ASEAN countries, you have bilateral travel plans and with Vietnam, Malaysia, with Singapore, etc. And I think let's work on this more seriously, because I think mobility is still very key. And of course, you know, the digital, as I said, fintech, it just, the investment community for fintechs just naturally follows, and I haven't seen any, it's not subsiding yet. It's just temporary on hold, but it's been potential exponential growth. Next, my last page, promise you that. So characteristics of the first wave of the pandemic is well understood, and social distancing have worked. But I must say it's not the same for everyone. I think a lot of our informal sector are still living in densely populated areas, and we need to, the public health focus, it's still a bit of a struggle, but it's already identified what to do next. But the question remains, how deep and how long is the pandemic? How fast can we recover? Perhaps how fast can we recover is by how well we work together and share information, experiences, yeah? This is another last point I'd make. Governments are highly leveraged all around the world. So I really believe there is a role for the private sector to be a leader in some of the, you know, human-centric issues that I've mentioned in this presentation. You know, how to operationalize the Hanoi platform, you know, and using a private sector track, perhaps, you know, we can fasten the seatbelt and really take a lead on this. Ultimately, I'd like to say, you know, I've said it before in different crises, and I'm embarrassed to say it again. Let's hope that never waste a good crisis, because this is an unprecedented, maybe this time we really not waste a good crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu. And thank you for excellent, very comprehensive, I call it update as well, and sharing your insights. I understand from our secretary there are a lot of questions, so it's a very good sign that you provoke a lot of interest. So we will get on to that. I just want to make two comments as a moderator, as someone who, obviously from the ABC point of view, are very appreciative of what you say in the context of trying to get ASEAN to work together. One is that Indonesia represents about 35% of the ASEAN GDP. So you are a big player. What Indonesia does, what Indonesia gets right, helps ASEAN. And I'm very happy to see that as a big player, that Indonesia is taking a very proactive stance. The other point is you make a very good last point, never waste a good crisis. And we are in a hugely deep and a very broad crisis. And I think if we get it right, as you say, we have a chance to change, reposition, reset the way businesses and governments work. Just one comment, because Indonesia is so big, so diverse, so complex. Yeah. And the things that you mentioned are impressive. Just on the ground, what people like us in the business want to see is that when the measures are off, when the foot is off the pedal, because after October 2020 and March 21, if the real reforms don't take place, we're back to square one. Are you optimistic, realistic about the chances of a real reset of things up? Because all of us here who are obviously tuned in have done business in Indonesia. The bureaucracy, the interface between provincial, central, regional, from what you tell us is that it's coming together. I hope it's beyond the crisis that we see this cooperation, which is central to any successful business, that the layers of government and the bureaucracy can be, if you like, eliminated or at least minimized. And in that context, I read a report that the Ministry of Finance says only about 34% of the relief budget had actually been dispersed. So it's something that we need to see it becoming a deep norm that it happens. So just a question on you, whether you think you're optimistic that this will be a chance for us to reset before I open up to the rest of the questions.
Well, you know, you've all started in January, and this is why you are where you are, you know, in a much better position than we are. We started only in March to take it seriously, to really realize, you know, to be honest about it, and that's and like a wake-up call and say, what are we doing, right? So, and you know, one hurdle that we have, obviously, that is not much talked about, and still a bit of a struggle, is the bureaucratic reform that hasn't really taken shape. Yeah. Since the Reformasi, it's been really slow progress, whereas all the other sectors have come a long way. I mean, you know, the banking sector is looking much better. You know, several other sectors doing much better. But the bureaucratic reform is still lagging behind. That said, however, this experience, which is unprecedented, I've never seen cooperation between businesses, government coming together and really make quick decision and really turning it around. Also, I've never seen a piece of regulation and technical implementation regulation, you know, available in the next few days, right? So it goes to show that it is quite possible, right?
Okay, good.
But now why is it in October? I mean, if it was introduced in March, you'd think that July would have already disbursed. That's why I'm being cautious and saying October. By that time, we really think that the at least the social safety net funds transfer would be already in place, right? Starting to trickle down much faster in the third quarter. It is a test for us to observe, both for the demand side and the supply side.
Okay, so now can I, on behalf of, we will receive many questions. So I think Juki,
Yes.
we will be asking you, Ibu,
Yes.
some of the questions that have been posted online to us. Juki, over to you.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chu. Ibu Felia, thank you very much for the presentation. You touched on what the Indonesian government has done to help the SMEs, and also in your concluding remarks, you also said that, or rather your last part presentation, you said that the role that the private sector can play, which is more on the human-centric issues. And we actually have a question actually posted by Lydia Radif, Director of Comms from Area. The question is, how can Indonesia's largest companies support SMEs during this crucial period? I think the focus on the largest companies. And perhaps I can also give you another question, which is has already been sent to us earlier. How far should the central bank work together with the government to handle the financial crisis while maintaining its independence? This is from Sinta Sirait, Chief Financial and Operations Officer from Jakarta Intercultural School. So I think I'll start with two questions.
Okay. Yes, I think if you observe, the large companies have not laid off. We have not received any reports of any layoffs by the large corporates, right? If especially the very well diversified corporates, and they are still assisting their supply chain with, you know, extension of payments, and this is already happening. Yeah. Even you know, the car dealerships, you know, they're still being able to pay their loan, although being given extension. It's because of being part of the big, you know, automotive ecosystem, the large companies like Astra and the rest of it. So we have not observed any layoffs, and maybe some of the commercial ones, not necessarily layoff, but that they're in hibernation. Maybe salaries are being cut partially, but as of yet, I've not received any report about any layoffs. But our problem is not so much in the real sector, but it's more in the informal sector.
Okay, so that would be the large corporations
out of a job. So the supply chain so far, but like I said, they're still using the cash reserve, and how long is the staying power? That's why it's very crucial in Q3, Q4 all the fiscal stimulus should be, taking its effect.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And then the other question, Ibu Sinta was asking about the independence of Bank Indonesia.
Yes.
Well, look, we have seen Bank Indonesia being able to maintain and work independently, have been able to be independent in its management of the interest rates, of the foreign exchange rate, and as well as the liquidity position. I think they have had a pretty good track record. Their managing of inflation has been a pretty good track record. There have been, some of the best and the brightest, and it's better well governed now, and also the best recruitment as I observe. So I don't see any, and plus it's by approval of the Ministry of the Parliament, and it's a temporary measure where when by 2023 the budget deficit has to go back to 3%. So it's just this period of time where all eyes are on wanting to make sure, because of our past experience decades ago, that we're not going to let our central bank be changed again.
Okay, thank you. Juki, next.
Yeah. Yes, all right. We still have a few more. We try to capitalize on the last 9 minutes or 8 minutes we have. There is a question from Mr. Michael Warren. The question is, this week Indonesia announced 10% VAT on digital and internet products, impacting huge tech giants like Google, Amazon, Netflix, etc., but also smaller digital players. What is your thoughts on this, especially in relation to timing of the decision during a difficult economic period when consumers have less purchasing power? So that's on this 10% VAT. And yes, please.
Yes. I think there's another side of the coin. The growth area is very much in the online commerce, e-commerce, and the big players are entering the Indonesian space. And I think, and tax, obviously, tax revenue is key. And obviously it wants to basically cross-subsidize, the development of the fintech industry, and it needs, the tax revenues from this sector.
Okay. Tax revenue is obviously crucial to any economy. And we have a few more questions, and this one is from, I think it's also from, okay, let me try this one. This is from Asnita. The pandemic has created uncertainty in markets and credit, which spreads increased risk to excess capital, operations, and profitability. How do banks respond appropriately to the above issue and stay resilient?
Yeah, well, banks are now still at this moment taking a very conservative stance. Even, the relaxation from the Financial Services Authority, they're doing this very carefully. For the moment, they don't have an appetite to grow aggressively until there is clarity on where COVID is going to end up in Indonesia. But whether or not we can manage the smart lockdowns, we call it, granular management of lockdowns, and this is still have to become regularized, and I don't think any bank today has an appetite to grow their assets for now. That said, the first priority is for the existing client base not to falter. That's why with the government's additional insurance scheme for SMEs, they're looking also selectively to provide working capital, right? But yes, I think perhaps in October, when things are clearer, there's always that possibility.
Sure. There's one more question by Eileen. This question is, as China was closed for the most of first quarter of 2020, it is vital for ASEAN to come together to address supply chain disruptions and the need to self-supply. I think you also mentioned in your presentation, self-reliance, self-dependency. Overly stringent control measure can, however, cause disruptions in supply chains that rely heavily on the movement of goods. A delicate balance has to be struck between implementing overarching protectionist measures and preserving national health and safety. Can you share with us how did Indonesia manage the regional supply chain disruption issue?
Yeah, I think the priority is on the essential goods to ensure the movement of goods in the archipelago. Priority is for essential goods, food, health related. This is still ongoing. I think that's the most rational step that any government can do for now.
Right, prioritizing the essential goods and perhaps services as well.
In any case, that's how the consumer behavior now behaves. They don't buy non-essential.
Yeah.
Thank you. Duki, do we have any more questions? I'm conscious of time.
So there are just two more. Two more, if you can accommodate. These two are from Ibu Sinta as well. Indonesians are one of the highest users of smartphones. Do you have the projection of potential increase of SME-based e-commerce transaction as well as cash transaction to individuals in remote areas? What is the 1% impact to the overall economic growth? And the other one says, fintech industry is growing. Will it build more traction as consumer behavior changes to online transactions? Well, there's a lot to unpack, I guess, the first question. Yeah,
I'm not sure I got that, but I think I know where she's getting at. Look, for now, the online transactions are exponential growth, but the value is still small. It's still small ticket items, right? She was asking about how much is the what? The first question?
What is the 1% impact to overall economic growth when it comes to the users of smartphones? Potential increase of SME. Do you have the projection of potential increase of SME-based e-commerce transactions as well as cash transfers to individuals in remote areas? And that would be something to find out. There's a lot of data to get.
Yes, I do in my bag. I have to dig it out from my bag. But yeah, look, it's potentially a huge market, right? But look, a lot of the fintech companies, it's exponential growth, but none of the fintech companies are making money yet. So relating to the taxing it's really taxing the large companies. The small companies is still under development. That's one thing. Secondly, Indonesia has decided that it's the fintech company at some point, it's really bank-led fintech. So if they want to go to the next level, they will have to cooperate with the banks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm afraid we don't have more time. We don't have any more time. Yeah.
I just want to say, do we have another 5 minutes if there are any dying questions? Anybody wants to ask anything in the audience, or do we wrap up, Duki?
There is one more question here, and I don't know whether anyone, So
before that, can I ask if anybody who is in audio wants to ask any burning questions? Because we put you on the hold for 1 hour. Anybody want to ask anything that
yes.
they would like to throw?
I think Arvin has a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yes, Arvin.
Hi, Ibu Felia. My name is Arvin.
Yeah, please.
I'm from Zico. My question is with regards to the export trends in Indonesia. Do you see a particular sector requesting for more funding? Is there a rise in export in a particular sector?
You know what, sorry? What sector?
The export trends in Indonesia. Do you see a particular sector requesting for more funding since post-COVID-19?
We have not seen, there is some slowdown, but there's, for now, for example, like the palm oil sales, some coal, is only because of existing contracts that is still ongoing, right? And the palm oil really depends on how China's recovery and India's recovery is going to take shape. But for the moment, that's still a net positive, but not immediately. But in the long run, I think that too we have to rethink about the palm oil exports. But looking at alternative for biofuel and also exports, some countries are looking to also import our B30 biofuel. So it's still in the commodity space. I don't see yet for the other manufacturing, except for food. Food, I think, is potentially a good prospect still, because food security is going to be in high demand.
Okay, do we have anybody who want to raise hand? Any question before we wrap up? Anybody who wants to raise your hand and ask a question? If
there is just one.
Please. Yeah. Okay.
This is already typed into the chat box. I'll just read it. If you want to, this is from Jeffrey Leando. The question is, if we want to buy a company, small or medium, in Indonesia who can't survive this COVID crisis, what's the cost of capital for the valuation at the moment?
I think the cost of capital is somewhat higher on average, obviously. But I think one area that needs to be the government policy on foreign investment. I think the government should rethink about putting a lower limit for investment in Indonesian SMEs. Right now, the limit is still quite high. Indonesia is targeting, high value investments, less so for SMEs. But I really think we need to rethink, as for example, as Indonesia is rethinking when they are discussing the Indonesia-Australia SEPA, the possible cooperation with amongst SMEs, SME investment. So that's in discussion, and I totally agree that it should be lowered, the investment targets for foreign investors.
Yeah.
Thank you. Juki, no more questions on the floor.
I just want to mention this question that I think Ibu Felia may have already covered earlier with regards to how do banks stay resilient? What can the banks do to monitor and mitigate risks such as credit losses, capital adequacy, liquidity, impaired assets, hedging, breakage, and need for increased disclosures? I suppose this was somewhat covered in the earlier question.
Yeah.
So I just want to raise
Yeah. Do you want me to kind of elaborate on it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, banks are very risk averse at the moment. Their growth projects, everybody's lowered their growth projection for the year. So they don't have a high appetite for additional asset growth. That said, as you know, in my opening remarks, we have been, also part of the global market that it's been somewhat under pressure, right? Our market is very much linked to China's health. That's why governments is encouraging businesses to look at alternative markets, and this is in progress, but of course this is going to take time. As you know, while maybe loan at risk right now it's higher. I think it's above 15%, I would imagine. Credit cost obviously is higher, but that our staying capacity is still significant. The average capital adequacy ratio of the Indonesian banks stands at about 20, maybe even 22. So, but we should not squander that, and but that continue to push for, you know, highest level of governance. That said, we do have obviously some problems if you read in the media, but then in the 1998 crisis in 2008, I think it's so very much in our minds that good governance is still, you know, something that continuously being pushed and also monitored. Even the state-owned banks are being audited multiple by independent financial audit, public audit, by state audit boards. So many layers, you know. So.
Okay. Thank you, Ibu. I think before I ask you to wrap up, I just want to thank you once again for a very comprehensive and very useful insights on the current situation. And we'd like just to maybe invite you for 30 seconds to say any closing remarks before we close, because you've spoken non-stop, which actually demonstrates the level of interest, but also your passion in wanting to share, that we don't let this crisis go, a good opportunity for this crisis to create some restructuring. You want to share the last 30 seconds closing remarks, Ibu, before we close off? Because
you know, on reflection, my you know, when you invited me, my earlier slides didn't show. It was quite a different recovery plan. It was a much gloomier recovery plan.
Okay.
That's much gloomier. It was a more longer protected scenario. But now with all the fiscal stimulus in place, and I see people coordinating, working much faster. I'm very hopeful that end of 2020, while it's still not going to look pretty, but it sets the tone for a recovery plan for 2021. It's still going to be difficult, 2021, but we have learned so much in such a short period of time. We have come to adapt how to be with the new health protocols. But what's left, there's still a lot of homework left. And then I really believe now, looking at the global trend, that we beg to differ. We need to work together. We need to continue to open our markets, unlike the global sentiment of retreating. I think we should do the reverse. I seriously believe that, because we cannot do it alone, and we can always talk about, you know, how to actualize the complementarity principles. So it's not just principles, but how the industry leaders, especially from this part of the world, collectively, I think we can make an impact and be that, if not a global leader, but a regional leader that has a voice in the global stage for this COVID.
Thank you, Ibu. And on that very positive and I think optimistic, I like to think, which is very important in this environment. Those of you who have joined us in this first ABC dialogue on corporate Indonesia's recovery measures, I thank you all for your time and your interest in asking questions. I, of course, want to thank Ibu once again for taking time and spending your valuable time to help us understand better what Indonesia is doing. And I think everyone in this dialogue would have benefited a lot from you. Thank you, Ibu, and good day to everyone, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you very much, Ibu. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu. Thank you, Mr. Chew. And our thanks to all of you who have just joined us for the past 1 hour. Don't forget to sign up for our next event with His Excellency Mr. Frederic Laplanche. And this time he'll be talking on French technologies, opportunities, and outlook for a digital ASEAN. So don't forget to join us. But we also have members-only activities. So please write to us if you would like to find out more. Till then, thank you and see you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hah? Lancar?